Somewhere along the way, somebody figured out that there have been roughly 106 billion people live on planet Earth. Now, that's just an estimate, and the estimates vary by 20 billion either side of that. So you'll find 86 billion sometimes, or you'll find 126 billion. But right there, about 106 billion people have lived on planet Earth since about the time of civilization is what the estimates are usually based on, which is about the last 6,000 years. So wouldn't argue too much with that 6,000 year time frame. But of all the people that have existed, there is one solitary life, just one, that stands out and continues to stand out throughout generation after generation. We're coming up on almost 2,000 years where Christ has become the centerpiece of humanity and very much continues to be. There's an essay, I'm going to read it to you. I hate to say it that way. That sounds like, oh no, he's going to read an essay. This is going to be bad. It's very short. It's double-spaced. I think it's a space and a half. It's called One Solitary Life. I'm sure you have heard it at one time or another, but it really points out quite well the uniqueness of Christ and the fact that here we are still worshiping Christ. Here's the essay. Here is a man born in obscurity, the child of a peasant woman. He lived in a disdained village. He worked in a carpenter shop until he was 30. Then for 3 years he was an itinerant preacher. He never owned a home. He never wrote a book. He never held an office. He never had a family. He never went to college. He never put his foot inside a big city. He never traveled 200 miles from the place he was born. He never did one of the things that usually accompanies greatness. He had no credentials but himself. While still a young man, the tide of popular opinion turned against him. His friends ran away. One of them denied him. He was turned over to his enemies. He went through the mockery of a trial. He was nailed to a cross between two thieves. While he was dying, his executioners gambled for the only piece of property he had on earth, his coat. When he was dead, he was laid in a borrowed grave through the pity of a friend. 19 long centuries have come and gone, and today he is the centerpiece of the human race. I'm far within the mark when I say that all the armies that ever marched, all the navies that ever sailed, all the parliaments that ever sat, all the kings that ever reigned, put together, have not affected the life of man on earth as much as that one solitary life. This will be in tonight's News and Notes, incidentally, if you'd like a copy of it. Now, I think the little essay there really just nails it down to, isn't that the truth? You've got one solitary life from nearly 2,000 years ago, and yet, here we are still today. Now, there are other people who have did greater things, traveled much further, had military conquest. Alexander the Great. He conquered all the known world just about. I mean, who could be greater than Alexander the Great? How many people you think are assembled together today remembering Alexander the Great? Thomas Edison, to come way on up in our time, and electricity and all the things that he did. I think that's pretty phenomenal stuff. You know, he's the reason we get to use the PowerPoint here in just a moment. How many people gather to worship and remember and commemorate? You see, you got that one solitary life 2,000 years ago and a little brief ministry. Now, the essay said 3 years. Normally we say 3.5 years, but still a very brief time. He walked around itinerant, means he was a preacher that traveled on foot. And he just traveled around and gave his message. And here we are still today, praising, studying, worshiping that one solitary life. Now, how can that be? That's what we're going to do in this lesson, is we're going to look at how is it that one such simple, short life has impacted the entire history of humanity. And I think where we're going to find a lot of our answer is in the 7 I am statements that John gives us in the Gospel according to John. There are 7 I am statements. These also will be listed in the News and Notes tonight, so you can have a copy of them. But what we're going to do is run through rather briefly. I told Sharon on the way over here, I said the sermon's got potential to be short, so get comfortable. It's probably going to be long. That's just kind of the way. Every time I say this might be short, well, things happen, and all of a sudden I'm thinking of things that I had not otherwise thought of. These are in text order. These are going to start from the first one. We'll go through the last one at John 15. And so there's no special arrangement of these. These are just the way they come in the Gospel according to John. Jesus said to them, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. Again, verse 48, I am the bread of life. Please notice he didn't just say, let me tell you about where you can find the bread of life. He said, I am the bread of life. Some of the statements, all of the I am statements, really, except maybe the I am the good shepherd, all of the I am statements, with the exception of that one, you'd have to be a liar or a lunatic to make them. If somebody else stood up, if I stood up, I wouldn't have the audacity to do it, and tried to proclaim to you that I am the bread of life, well, number one, you wouldn't let me finish the sermon, which would be wise, but it would just be so absurd. It would just be, how could you say something like that? And yet the I am statements of Jesus, if he wasn't what he said he was, fall into that same category of absurdity. And yet 2,000 years ago, he said what no man has ever said. He came on the scene with some unique teaching, as you read at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 7. Look at the last verse there. And the people were amazed because he didn't teach as the Pharisees taught. He taught as one having authority. There was something different. And that different is he was the bread of life. Now, bread we always needed, and we always knew it was more than just physical bread. That goes all the way back to Deuteronomy 8:3, where he says, let me just read the very last part of it. He says, man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. You are probably familiar with that when it's quoted over in Matthew 4:4, when Christ is in the wilderness and the temptation, and he says exactly the same thing to Satan. We need that bread. And it is not physical bread, it is spiritual bread, and Christ says he is that bread. And it gets a little hard because now we're getting into that whole area about deity becoming flesh. And I don't even attempt to figure all of that out. Now, some people don't like it, but I'm the guy who goes along with some of the others that say, don't whittle on God's end of the stick. God said it, that settles it. Don't worry about how it all works out. That's just the way it is. And so when I read John 1:1 and John 1:14, I don't get all bogged down in the details. He said, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, that's what the book says. And so I need the Word of God. Man doesn't live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Christ is the bread of life. He is that which came down from heaven, as he would say in John chapter 6. He said, the Word became flesh, dwelt among us. We beheld His glory as the glory of the only begotten Father, full of grace and truth. And so here we have, some 2,000 years have gone by since this teaching that He gave us, and we are still nurturing our spirits upon that bread of truth, upon that bread of life that He gave us, because He is that bread of life. And I would suggest to you the reason this one solitary life, who only had a little bitty ministry from the age of 30 to 33 and a half, the reason it had such a phenomenal impact is because it transcended anything that I or any other teacher like me could do. It went to another level because He is, let me put it that way, the bread of life. He is the Son of God, and thus there's something that people recognize, they hear, there's a hunger, and thus the continued popularity of Christ. And I think I'm not being too daring when I say I believe that popularity will continue to the end of time. Now that's the first I am statement. Then He said, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. As long as I am the world, I am the light of the world. Now again, He didn't say, let me tell you where you can go find out about some light. He said, I am the light of the world. And light is something we all desperately need, because as Romans 3:23 says, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and sin is referred to as darkness. We all walk in that darkness, eternal loss. And Jude is referred to as darkness, and the wages of sin is death. And so our only hope for light is to look for Christ and the light that He brought to us. As Jeremiah 10:23 says, it's not a man who walks to direct his own steps. We just don't have it within ourselves. If it was up to us, if we didn't have the Word, if we didn't have this revelation to tell us, or as David might say in Psalms 119 and 105, Thy Word is a light unto my feet. If God hadn't condescended, if God hadn't humbled Himself to speak to us and reveal what we needed to know, if we had to figure it out 100% on our own, we couldn't do it. But Christ came and He said, I am the light of the world. And He is the light of the world. And when we have that light, we don't walk in darkness. We walk in Him, and we have that hope of reconciliation. And there have been enough people over the 2,000 years now who have looked at the Word and have looked at Christ and have seen that light and have taken hope in that light. And they understand that He is their only hope. He is their only way. They can't do it of themselves. And thus they follow the footsteps of Jesus, which is exactly what 1 Corinthians 11:1 tells us to do. Paul says, imitate me as I also imitate Christ, which is definitely the thing you want. Third I am statement that He makes. Jesus said unto them, most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. Now, I tried to find a picture of something more of a sheepfold here. And an ancient sheepfold, this might not be just really representative. An ancient sheepfold generally was a circle. Now, the circle could vary, but it was usually an enclosure circle of a stone fence. And they just stacked stones up, and then there was a little gate, and they'd bring the sheep in and out that gate, so they could come in and stay safe. They'd go out and find pasture. Christ said He was the door. He is the way. And again, rather a phenomenal statement if you'll think about it, because if any preacher ever stood up and said, I am the door, we wouldn't have anything to do with him. That'd be it, and he might get a little following, but it'd fizzle out and we'd be done with him. Here Christ stands up and says, I'm the door. You want to get to God, then I am the way. And later on we'll look at the verse where He says, I am the way, I'm the truth, and the life. He says there's no other way. This is it. That's what Jesus is. Now, our sins had separated us from God, as Isaiah 59:2 says. And so what happened, as we had Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Our iniquities have separated us from God. Our sins have hidden His face from us. And we get ourselves in a predicament that we can't remedy outside of Christ. Without the Word, and I'm talking about John 1:1, the Word. Without the Word, we just don't have that hope of eternal life. And so fortunately for God, after we, mankind, made a horrible mess of everything, and that's probably an understatement, after we, mankind, got ourselves into sin and have separated ourselves from God because of our sins, the ones we chose to walk in, God desired to make a way of reconciliation. And that way of reconciliation, His plan, His door, is Jesus. Of course, I like the line in the song, oh, the love that drew salvation's plan, oh, the grace that brought it down to man, oh, the mighty gulf that God did span at Calvary. Now, I think that kind of really sums it up, but you have to understand, Christ didn't say this. Now, let me point you, there's a door somewhere over there. If you search around, you find it. He said, I am the door. Some of your translations will say, I am the gate. Now, again, it's rather preposterous if He's not. There's a thing we call the trilogy, Lord, Liar, or Lunatic. And we say Jesus cannot be put in the good man category. And He cannot. A lot of people want to say, well, Jesus, He was a good guy, but that's all He was. No, He wasn't. Look, our first three I am statements pretty much tell you can't put Him in the good man category. A good man doesn't say, hey, I'm the bread of life. Hey, I'm the light of the world. Hey, I'm the door to the Father. A good man, and a liar would say it. A nut might say it. Or the Son of God might say it. But just a good man, just a regular person like you and me, we would never say anything like that. Why does this one solitary life from 2,000 years ago, who, as the little essay said, never owned a home, never went to the big cities, never did all of those things associated with greatness, he just walked around nasty little Israel, came out of Nazareth, and taught his message. And yet here we are 2,000 years later. What was it that made the difference? And I'm telling you, the difference is in the I am statements. He was more than just you and me. He was what God had intended. Now, the Good Shepherd. This is probably the easiest one for us to understand because, to say somebody is the door, the light, the bread, that's a little awkward. Incidentally, in John chapter 6, where He said He was the bread, the teaching that He gave there goes a little further. He talked about being the bread unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood. And the people got so frustrated with Him that most of them left. That's the context in which He looked at the others and He said, do you want to go away also? Now again, that's John chapter 6. And those analogies, those stories, those illustrations, those way of teaching, those are hard to get our mind around. But He says, I'm the shepherd. I'm like, okay, I can get the shepherd because I understand, not much, but I understand a little bit about shepherding and how a shepherd or a herdsman, would deal with livestock and make sure they're safe and let them in and out and keep an eye over them, and that helps. Now, Christ says He is the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives His life for the sheep. A little bit of foreshadowing there, isn't it? He says He gives His life for the sheep, and of course we know what happened on Calvary. He said the hireling is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep. Pause there a second. One of the things I think many of us recognize is He does own us. I say that from time to time. He does own us. We are His property, and He points it out here in passing. The one who doesn't own the sheep sees the wolf coming, leaves the sheep, and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and doesn't really care about the sheep. Christ said, I'm the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and I'm known by my own. Now, Again, here's the one who loves and nurtures and cares for us, and He is the Good Shepherd who did lay down His life for us. And in all of that, there's something that rings true with the heart of many. Not just on rare occasion, but for some 2,000 years, this one little solitary life who did his entire ministry lifetime in a place smaller than the area of Arkansas. That one little peasant life, if you would, that one solitary life is that people are still looking for, hungering for, that good shepherding that we all so desire. Somebody said, the basic need of man's heart is just the desire to be loved. Well, that's what Christ does for us, doesn't He? When you start to understand it, when you get past the fluff and stuff and all the bake-offs and the cook-offs and the basketball games and the social gospel, as we call it, and you get down to the book, chapter, and verse stuff, you got a good shepherd there that says, come on, this is a flock you want to be a part of because I'm going to take care of you. And by take care of you doesn't mean I'm going to give you a 2-story house and a Mercedes-Benz and Olympic-sized swimming pool. It means I'm going to prepare a place for you in my Father's house, and you're going to have eternal life. And that rings true with enough people for over 2,000 years that here we are still. Now, I understand that ultimately it's the minority. That'd be Matthew 7, 13, and 14. Straight and narrow is the way, few there be who find it. But that few has been enough to keep the hope and the teaching, Christianity, if I may say it that way, alive for 2,000 years from that very, very humble beginning. So now we have 4 of our I am statements. And again, I would suggest to you without any hesitation that these are ideas, insights into Christ as to how that one solitary life could have such a major impact out of some 106 billion people that lived on the planet. And yet we keep coming back to that one. Even our way of telling time, we have BC and AD. Now I know there's a move on right now trying to get rid of AD because they don't like AD. It's, what does it call it? ACE, after Common Era, or the CE Common Era. I don't like that. I want it to be BC, before Christ. I want it to be Anno Domini, which means after the birth of Christ. I want Christ in the middle of it. But there's a slight move to try to take that out. So you'll see CE and BCE. Now next Christ said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. Ponder that with me a second. Here's a man, again, he's 30 years old, which by all of our, most of our estimations would be rather young. And he goes around about walking with a band of folks who aren't really appreciated. And he's just a foot-traveling preacher. He's aggravated most of the religious establishment. We'll see in a minute, they're trying to kill him. And yet he says, I am the resurrection. I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. Do you see how preposterous that is? How outrageous? How much he's got to be either an outright liar or outright nut or the Son of God. Again, you can't put him in the good man category. That's just not going to work for us. And so he says, you want to live forever? I'm the way. Now, there is in us, I forget which verse it is in Ecclesiastes, but it is in the little book Ecclesiastes. It said God put eternity in the heart of man. There is in man something that looks beyond the tombstone. I have a book in my library, and it's about all the death, afterlife customs of everything they could research from every civilization they have. And everybody has some kind of, after you die, you go to the great happy hunting grounds, or you were Pharaoh and you went to wherever Pharaoh went. But they all have something, because there's something inside us, a spirit, if you would, inside us that longs for our Creator, that longs for a life after the tombstone. And so we look beyond and we come up with various ideas. Christ spoke to that spirit and He said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Here He said, I am the resurrection. And even though this body's going to die, because we're all going to step out of this physical tent one day, that's just a matter of when. You know, basically we get 70 to 80 years in our country because we have better medical. A lot of folks will get 90 years. But even if you get 100 years, you're still going to die. I mean, come on, there's no way around that one. One of these days, you're dead. And I know that. You know that too, don't you? And so there's something in there now and then. I don't like to look at that too often, but there's something in here that says, I want something beyond. And Jesus says, I'm the resurrection. I am the life. And it rings true at some level. And so we listen and we follow. And enough people have been doing it for 2,000 years that here we are in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, a place that people never ever knew existed till probably about the 1400s. I know there's some native Indians here maybe a little bit before us, but generally speaking, whole unknown place. And yet, here we are, and we're assembled today, and we'll continue assembling as long as people in this area believe. That's what Christ did for us. As Hebrews 9:27 pointed, a man wants to die and then the judgment. Our next I am statement, Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I usually emphasize the last part of this. No one comes to the Father except through me, which is rather arrogant, isn't it? Well, I'll tell you, you talk about exclusivism, that's exactly what that is. No one comes to the Father through me, but he said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Again, if just a man said it, you go, that guy's a nut. Or he's a liar, he's a con artist. There's nothing nice you can say about somebody who isn't mentally unstable saying something like that. And yet here's Jesus saying that, and he's got so many followers that the religious establishment is really worried about him, and they're trying to kill him. In John chapter 11, now this is going back a couple of chapters before 14:6, but the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? For this man works many signs. Ooh, that tells you something, doesn't it? If we let him alone like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation. So here we have Christ saying, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And while it ought to be preposterous that anybody would dare claim that, he's having success, such a phenomenal success, that the establishment is worried to death that Rome's going to come in and intervene because, well, it's all politics with the Pharisees and the establishment. Now, I think there's a big part of it wrapped up when he said, for this man works many signs. You see, Jesus wasn't just a Clarence or just a Walton Weaver or just a Wayne Greason or just a Ed Dye, to name the preachers that have been here at this location. Jesus was the way. Let me change that. He is the way. That's not past tense. He is the truth. He is the life. And so when he said these things and he did these things, people recognize there's something more going on. And now it's been like 2,000 years since he was here and did the many signs that he did. And so you could say, well, I understand why he was really popular while he was here, and it was all unfolding while he was here because he was really exciting and entertaining people with his magic tricks. Had to be a whole lot more than magic tricks, though, to be 2,000 years later, and as it said, it would be like a little leaven that leavened the whole lump, and it would grow, and it would take over the world. And now, like 1/3 of the world's population generally claims to be following Christ. Now, I know we got a lot to say about that, but still, you got about 1/3 of the world's population that claims to be following the Bible. How does all that happen if they were just parlor tricks? There was so much more than parlor tricks. There's one more passage we got to look at here. A great many of the Jews knew that he was there, Jesus. They came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. And the chief priests plotted to put Lazarus to death, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. And one of the reasons they tell us that, now this isn't biblical, this is a little more a historical, cultural thing. One of the reasons Lazarus became such a focal point was, well, number one, he was dead 4 days, right? Was it Mary or Martha said, don't open it, it stinks already? But, you know, to raise somebody who just fell over dead just a few moments ago, we could question that, right? We go, well, maybe they weren't really dead. Maybe they just passed out. And, you know, they didn't have the medical technology we have. It hasn't been, but within the last 100 years or so, that they actually would come up with different ways to make sure somebody was really, really dead before they actually buried them. Well, now you got 4 days. He's dead. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. He's out of here. He's gone. And Christ stands at the door of the tomb and says, Lazarus, come forth. And now you've got something undeniably phenomenal. You've got people coming to see Lazarus. You've got people believing this one that said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. And the Pharisees and the religious establishment are worried to death. How does that happen? How does the son of a carpenter, if that's all he is, go around on foot, traveling with the people that aren't very highly respected? I mean, Matthew was a tax collector. What do you make of tax collectors? We still don't like them. Back then, we liked them even less because they worked for Rome. And yet, he established a religious movement that took root and grows even 2,000 years later. Why? How does that work? I think it's in the I am. And then finally, our seventh, and this is, if you do a concordance, you may find a couple more in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but these are just the ones in John. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. I am the vine, you're the branches. Who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. Again, pretty preposterous, isn't it? When he says, I am, and he doesn't say, I am a vine, or let me tell you about a vine. He says, I am the true vine. That's exclusiveness, isn't it? He didn't say, now you can go here and try this vine, or you can try that one, or John 14:6. He said, no one comes to the Father except through him. And so here we have this itinerant preacher. He's 30 to 33 years old, walking around with a band of people not highly respected, always getting in trouble with the religious establishment. And he says, I am the true vine. And 2,000 years later, here we are still singing songs to his praise, commemorating his death, burial, and resurrection, worshiping him and letting his teaching guide us through our daily life and the decisions we make and the way we behave. How is that? What is going on? How does that work that one solitary life can do that? And I'm going to take you back to Isaiah 9:6 and warn you again, I don't get into the mechanics of it, but here's what he said. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Government will be upon his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God. Isn't that phenomenal right there? His name will be called Mighty God. His name will be called Everlasting Father. His name will be called Prince of Peace. Now, Wonderful Counselor, Prince of Peace, we're like, yeah, we're pretty good with that. But when you get to Mighty God and Everlasting Father, what do you do with Jesus? And then let me take you back where we were a while ago with John 1 and 14. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh. Mighty God, everlasting Father, he said. Now again, I have never, ever dealt into the mechanics of all of it. I frankly don't care too much about the mechanics of all of it. Now, some of my brethren have done it, and some of them have split congregations over it and caused all kinds of trouble in the brotherhood over it. I've never gone there. I side up with the guys who say that's whittling on God's end of the stick. First person I ever heard say that was Brother D. Bowman when the folks was fussing about that back in the 70s. Of course, that was way over my head then. And then later on, just recently, Brother James Lusby, as we were talking about it, he said, you know, that's God's end of the stick. I'm not going to worry about. My thing about the mechanics is the only mechanics I know are earthly physical mechanics. And I don't think I can take my finite physical understanding and really explain the infinite divine and the things that he did. And furthermore, I understand my brotherhood well enough that if I did figure it out, half of them would still disagree with me and tell me I was a heretic. So I got some better things to do other than try to figure all that out. I know the 7 I am statements of Jesus. I know 2,000 years ago you got a life that ought not to ever been more than a local blip. And 2,000 years later, here we are. And he still is everlasting Father and mighty God. How does one solitary life make such a difference? Because that one solitary life was the great I am. And if you want to enjoy the blessings that one I am brings, then what you do is you embrace him with all your heart. You surrender your life to him and you walk in his footsteps the absolute best that you can. And so we'll close there. Are you? If you are, stay the course. If you're not, it's time to make a change. We're here to help any way we can while together we stand and sing.